Perfect timing, everyone. So welcome. I'm Brett Furman with the Brett Furman Group. And hopefully everybody today is somewhere in this area. And we're going to move on to the presentation and give you a little bit about who we all are. So my name is Brett Furman. I'm a real estate broker. This is I'm going into my 37th year as a real estate broker, involved in lots of different facets of real estate. Primarily, I specialize in representation of home sellers. And that's what I've been doing for a little over 36 years. I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of writing. I wrote a book. I've been involved in a lot of different facets. And the rest of my team, who is not on the call, because today is one of those days when you're out and about with your buyers because it's a very busy market right now. So my special guests, who are they? First, we welcome and welcome back again and again, Lydia Gemmer, who has extreme expertise in senior housing. What's great about Lydia is not only have you been involved in various different places in the area, not only as inside the facilities, but you did some work, as home health care, but you've also personally been involved in all the various issues with your family, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Extensively for many years.
So Lydia is awesome to have. So welcome, Lydia.
Thank you.
And then our special guest today is Laura Tobey. So welcome, Laura. Say hello to everyone.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Laura is a local attorney with Reidenbach Associates. I've had the pleasure of working with that firm for many clients, and they do a great job. And what's great is you're local. I love your background. Specifically, I saw the psychology background, which I'm sure helps in this world of what you're working with, because I know there's lots of challenges that people have in these situations when you're dealing with estates and trusts and whatnot. But you're also very active in the community, which is awesome. And we're so fortunate to have you that we are very appreciative. And we're going to move along. So Laura will, hang on, let me just get my computer's a little, there it goes. Everyone on the call today, those that are listening, those that are going to be listening to future recordings, have access to our home concierge service. And this is something we put together at our office that if you need help with anything, say you want to stay in your house, we talk about age in place, Lydia, right? We've done that multiple times. So many people, that's a lot of people are interested in that. They want to equip their house with grab bars and other things. We have all kinds of vendors for you that can help. Handymen, we have landscaping people, painters, whatever you need. Of course, we have estate attorneys and we have Laura on the call. So if you need that service, we welcome you to call her. What this is all about, we have some more people joining, so welcome. What this is all about today is kind of the question that I get as a real estate broker so many times, and that's, what are the steps to manage the process with the sale of a loved one's home after they're passing, right? What do you do? How do you do it? Our guest today is going to really dive in. We could spend, I'm sure, Laura, you could spend a day on any given topic, I would think. But today, what Laura is going to be talking about are the topics here, which she's going to give you an overview of estate planning. She'll talk to you about some of the documents. What are the documents involved? How about the last will and testament? How does that work? What happens if you don't have one? What happens if you do have one? So we'll be talking about Pennsylvania intestacy. And then, of course, the benefits of probate, disadvantages, and alternatives. And what are the duties for the administrator of the estate? So Laura, let's start with you and talk about, if you will, a little bit about the documents. That seems to be the first part of the process. What are those documents in a simple estate plan?
Sure. And again, everybody's estate is different because we're all different. But generally, we will do, and it depends on everybody's stage in life, but we'll do a will. And that will can include a testamentary trust for grandchildren or children, which would mean that the assets would pass to perhaps the spouse first and then go into the trust for children or grandchildren. And then those are flexible in distribution ages and so forth. In that document, you nominate an executor to handle your estate once you pass, a trustee if there's a trust, a guardian if you have minor children. And really, that's how you set forth your wishes as to how you want your estate to pass, rather than leaving it up to Pennsylvania statutes. We also do a financial power of attorney. I consider this to be the second most important document. This document allows someone to handle your finances. Should you be unable to, or if you're on a trip and a bill needs to be paid, it doesn't always have to be something tragic. This document also replaces having to have a guardian appointed if someone becomes incapacitated. If you have a power of attorney, you have the power to choose who you want to be your guardian, versus if you don't have this document, then you have to go to court and through a very rigorous process to have someone appointed. And that is way more expensive than having a power of attorney drafted. We also do, go ahead.
Lydia, what happens in your world when people come into the 55 plus community with these various documents? Is that something that needs to, is that on the initial visit, or when do you get those documents?
If somebody is moving into the community, we do, we can't mandate, but we do request a copy of advanced directives, financial and healthcare. But it's interesting what Laura's bringing up about guardianship, because I've had experiences with that, and that is very challenging. The other thing in terms of that is if you don't have children, and you appoint somebody as your power of attorney who doesn't act, and maybe we can get into that later, but I have run into that situation where it's a niece or a nephew and they just kind of refuse to address issues that come up. So there are a lot of complicated things that happen in our world that we don't want to think about, but we need to. So yes, very, very important documents.
Yeah, I always say it's not something we want to think about, but if you take the power into your own hands and make the decisions for you rather than someone else doing it, just get it out of the way. And if something happens, your family is in a very emotional state.
Right.
You've taken care of this and you've given them that gift of here's the roadmap. Lydia just mentioned the two other documents. We do a healthcare power of attorney, which I say is if you're going in the hospital for a procedure and they find something else wrong, but you're already under anesthesia, your agent can say, yes, you know, go ahead and take care of that. And that's different from the living will, which is the end of life decision. So if you are unable to, if you're able to speak for yourself, that's our first preference. But if you're unable to, then your agent can make those decisions on your behalf.
Okay, so let's go to the second question, which was about the last will and testament and about the assets and what are the benefits and all, and how does all that work and how does that fit into the picture here?
Sure. So there are two kinds of assets. Probate assets are those that are in your name alone and they pass via the will. Non-probate assets, we coordinate with our clients to make sure their beneficiary designations are in line with their estate documents, which is something that not all estate planners do. That is your 401ks, that's your IRAs, your life insurance policies, and we make sure that the beneficiaries are designated properly for those, and those assets pass quicker sometimes because the beneficiary is already designated. So you just need to really send in the paperwork for those if something were to happen. With probate assets, we have to probate the will, and we'll get to that a little bit later. A lot of times they try and scare you with probate. Probate is not scary in Pennsylvania. It's just not, especially since the pandemic. A lot of times the meetings now to open an estate are online. So it's just a Zoom like this. You say you're going to administer the estate, and then we get the paperwork to handle the assets.
And how long, Laura, does this take? Is it what would you say for the process itself, for the paperwork portion of this?
And that varies by county. It depends on how backed up the county is. I submit the paperwork, they appoint a probate hearing, and that honestly takes anywhere from 5 minutes to half an hour. It's not a complex thing. You sign something either on camera or electronically, And then they process the paperwork, and then you get your short certificates, which are the documents that say you are the executor or you are the administrator if there's not a will. And that is the document that gives you the ability to act on behalf of the estate.
And when do you typically think people should start this process? Is there like a certain age, or do you have like certain recommendations, or does it vary by your client's needs and their family situation?
It's a good question. So I think that if you own anything, that you care where it goes, if you pass, you should have these documents.
Mhm. I so agree with that. I am often shocked when I talk to some people and they don't have a will and they
Mhm.
have children in particular. It's scary.
Yeah.
But it's so true. If you want control over these things and that you own, it's just so important. I think people just, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't want to think about it, but you really need to. Again, proactive, right, Brett?
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about in all these the ABCs of senior housing webinars, we talk about the reactive versus the proactive process. And
Mhm.
certainly we favor the proactive, but in my 37 years, I see a lot of reactive things where things just happen and it just
Mhm.
gets out of control and they should have moved, but health gets in the way or something, and it's not always pleasant when that happens.
Right. Right.
We try to make this process as easy as possible. I give clients as much information and I guide them through the process so that at the end they're like, wow, this was really easy. I don't know why I didn't do it sooner.
Mhm.
So because it's not a topic you'd like to talk about, but if you can get it done and give your family that peace of mind, it's really invaluable.
Mhm. And a will doesn't have to be complicated,
Nope.
right, Laura?
Nope.
And I think people think, no, you just need to get something in place and then review it how often would you suggest to review your wills?
So that's a really good question. I suggest to look at it maybe every 5 years, or if there is, and you could look at it sooner than that, but at least that's a minimum. Or if you don't like somebody you've nominated in documents, if someone passes, if you get inheritance, if you buy property, if your situation changes, look through these documents and make sure they make sense.
Absolutely.
So it's an ongoing type process where you should keep updating it to make sure in case your situation changes that you're covered properly.
Yes. And talking about intestacy, so these are the laws that what happens to your stuff if you do not have a will. And one of the most interesting things to people that I find is if you are married but you don't have children and you pass, your spouse will get the first 30,000 and then split it with your parents. People think it just goes to the spouse, and that's not the law in Pennsylvania.
That's automatic? Are you saying, Laura, that's automatic? Like with no will?
Yes. And I've dealt with that case. I asked the parents, do you want to take your half or do you want to give it to the surviving spouse? And they said, we'll take our half, please. Thank you.
Interesting.
So it does happen. And then there are rules about how much goes to the spouse. And then if you do have children, the spouse gets half and the children get half. But then if they're minors, you have to go to court to put it in a account that is restricted because you didn't do a trust or you didn't plan for that. And then the court gets to decide when those children get that money. And usually it's 18, and that is not what I recommend for minors. I do not think you should hand 18-year-olds
Oh my goodness.
money unfettered.
Yeah. And I will say I've had personal experience with this and within my family, not in Pennsylvania, but in another state.
Yep.
And it was again, it was a very unexpected death of a young person.
Yes.
Who had a child. And it was very tragic and upsetting and emotional.
Yes.
And then to not be able to find a will was very challenging.
Yep.
So.
I've had the same situation where there was a will. It happened to be a legal Zoom will, which are not my favorite. And because he did it himself and he didn't do it right. I mean, so again, this account goes into the minor share will go into an account till 18, and the surviving parent says, I don't want this. I know this child. This will not be the right fit. And my hands are tied.
Yeah. Oh, that's awful.
You're stuck. Oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
Sweet.
And in all these various documents, the one thing I get many times, Laura, is that people, I just had one this week where we're selling a property and the occupant is in an assisted living facility, or no, actually, she's in a facility, and the family said to me, all the money is going to go to the home, that she's not going to get any. Is there anything that can be done to protect the client from that happening?
Sure. I mean, the use of trust, I don't want to get too deep and complex, but the use of trust potentially, but there are look back periods and so forth. So certain things need to happen to have it not pulled back into the estate. But yes, with proper planning, there are things you can do.
So that comes in under, is that in the documentation side? Like you would assess that kind of in the beginning to figure
Yes.
out how we can protect the people from, protect their assets?
Correct.
So what about
Yeah.
what about the pros and cons and any alternatives on the probate side? What do you recommend there?
So again, I mentioned probate is not scary. I'm sure in other states it's way more complex. In Pennsylvania, it's just not. And it's a guided process. There are protocols you need to follow. It is supervised by a judge if necessary. If there are bumps, there's a limited creditor claim period, and it's, if the beneficiaries have any problems, they can be addressed in that. You do put your will on record once you pass through probate. I don't know anyone on this call who's probably gone to the courthouse to look up somebody else's will, so that does not generally happen. You do have to wait. I would say a probate process is about a year at least. You pay an estimated inheritance tax within 3 months. You get a 5% discount if you can do that. Not all estates have the liquidity to do that. The return needs to be filed within 9 months. And then the government is taking about 6 months to review that return and finally give you what's called an appraisement, which is the document that realtors and title companies need to be able to release any inheritance tax escrows that are held at time of settlement.
Interesting.
Because that does happen a lot, Laura. What we see is that if a loved one passes and they want to sell that property and they're kind of in the middle of this process, it seems like what happens most of the time is there's a requirement to hold like an escrow.
Yep.
And I've seen it anywhere from like 1.5 times to 2 times.
Okay.
Is that sound about standard? Is that how that works?
Usually see 1.5, but if I can prove that we have paid an estimated tax at that 3-month mark and we're doing the sale after that, I have been successful in getting title agents to reduce that amount.
That's interesting because so basically they're taking the seller's proceeds, they're putting into like an escrow account, and then there's a period of time that they won't see that funds until they get that appraisement back. Is that
Correct.
how it works?
Yes. So if, say, you sell the house in 3 months from the date of death, and then we don't file the return until 9 months, and then there's an additional 6 months of review, that money that the title company is holding is locked up for some time.
Wow.
Which is why I try to reduce it and pay, and say, look, we paid this. It's a lot of that. Can we just hold, $5,000 or $1,000? Because I get that they want to be protected, but if I've done my job correctly and we've paid the taxes, they shouldn't hold the whole amount.
But that's great information too, because as Brett's saying, people are usually relying on the equity in their home if they're moving on to a facility or wherever. And that sounds a little scary overall, but like you're saying, Laura, you can work through that. And if somebody guides you, and you listen to your attorney, basically, you can work through that.
Yeah.
And is the return typically done by a CPA? Is that what you would see how that happens?
So I prepared the Pennsylvania 1500. So I do the Pennsylvania state inheritance tax return.
Got it. Okay. And then you have to file that? Is that what's this? Sure.
So that gets filed with a copy of the will. Then a lot of the heavy lifting with that document is getting the date of death values for the return. We pay inheritance tax on the value of the accounts and the assets as of the date of death. Working through financial institutions, this document has proven to be more difficult over time.
Oh, wow.
But I've gotten pretty good at, conveying to them. It's so funny because I'll have people be like, I need to talk to the executor. I'm like, but the executor is sad right now. And that's why I've been hired.
Oh, yeah.
Very, that part bothers me because, people ask for help when they need it, and then that should be respected.
Mhm.
And how about the value of the real estate? How does that come into play in this whole process from do you value it before you actually sell it and it's based on date of death or?
Yeah, there are a couple ways to do it. So you can get an appraisal. They do accept Zillow or any of those you can do a snapshot on that date of death. Or a lot of times I use the CD, the settlement statement, and we take the net, you net out all the costs and so forth, and you can pay tax on that. They also accept the CD. So it just depends on the timing of everything. I unfortunately have people who come to me and say, my mom died 2 years ago. That's a little bit more tricky than doing it in a relatively timely fashion. There is no hurry other than the statutory requirements of the 3 months and then the 9 months. Because if you do not file the Pennsylvania inheritance tax within 9 months, you will incur penalties and interest.
Oh,
What's the penalty for not doing that? Is it
there's a percentage, but I think it maxes out at 1,000 for the penalty.
Okay.
And then interest is just based on days.
And do you find most people get that done in that time period? Is that pretty typical?
Yes, if you, usually those are people who didn't realize they needed to do something and then time has passed. But if you come to me in a timely manner, then yes, absolutely. It is my job to keep you on the timeline.
I'll watch the timeline. Wow, there's a lot of moving parts on this one.
Well, you know that as a
Yeah.
realtor.
Yeah.
it's all time management.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, yes, it is. It's a process though. And again, it's that we talk about this proactive versus reactive.
Mhm.
You can see for those on the call, the benefit of starting this process well in advance and having all your ducks in line, I'm assuming makes it much easier for Laura if you're not scrambling at the end, I take it.
Yes, I honestly, I can say that if someone has an estate plan that I can follow, that's much easier than having to go statutorily to find all these things. A lot of times I send clients a questionnaire where they give me an idea of where their assets are. If you don't have that, then whoever's stepping up to be the administrator has to figure out where your assets are. If I have a list of them, we know where to start.
Well,
and then the duties of an executor. And so an executor is if there's a will, an administrator is if they're not. A lot of times you coordinate with an attorney. I work both ways in that some clients are like, I cannot deal with this. I have a job. I'm grieving, you handle everything. Or I have some clients that want to try and minimize the lawyer doing things and spending money for things that they can do. And I am happy to give clients a list of things to run around and get to do that legwork. And then I will do the legal things. Happy to do that. As I said, the first step is to have the will, to have the death certificate. We prepare a petition for the Register of Wills to have the person appointed. We have a Zoom meeting to have them sworn in. We need your ID. And then after we have that, we have to complete a bunch of statutorily required tasks, such as giving notice, advertising the estate. That starts the statute of limitations for creditors running. We gather all the assets, we get the date of death values, we pay all the debts, we prepare the return, close accounts, file any insurance claims that we need to. And then ultimately, once we get that appraisement back, we can distribute the monies. You can do partial distributions if someone needs money before that, but then you do the final distribution after the government has approved the return.
Laura, I have a question about the executor.
Sure.
Does it, and maybe it's a stupid question, but when you're creating your will, is it advisable to let the executor or executors know that they are going to have that responsibility?
That's a good question. It goes both ways, because you could appoint an executor and then change your mind.
Right.
The one thing I'll say is that some people are like worried about that, but I always tell them at the time this document is revealed to people, you will be dead. And so nobody's
Right.
going to be mad at you.
Right.
And you won't get in trouble.
And do you find, I've seen situations where 4 people have been named and they've had to, unfortunately, 3 of them kind of abdicated their responsibilities to allow 1, because I know even like, well, you'll get into the powers of attorney and living will and stuff, but sometimes parents feel like every child needs to be involved, which is not always a good situation.
So I recommend that for powers of attorney and the will, that you nominate 1 person and then a backup and a backup. Say you have
Okay.
3 kids, just put them in order. For exactly that reason, unless both people are local. If you have co-executors, they both need to sign checks, they both need to make decisions. That becomes cumbersome. In certain circumstances, they will tell me that their kids get along great, and I'll be like, okay, I've warned you. If this is what you want to do, this is your choice. This is your will. I'm going to do what you want, but I've educated you on the pitfalls. But I agree with you. I think that 1 person, and I like when you have a husband and wife for a financial power of attorney, it should really be the same person for both of them, because then you don't have 2 people playing with pots of money.
Right.
For
And
healthcare documents, it's fine to have whoever you want, however many people. Again, you have to be mindful. If you have more than 1 person, there could be a disagreement and that could cause problems.
Well, and your attorney can be your backup as well, correct?
Yes, that is possible.
I have one right now, Laura, that I'm involved in, and it's an estate, and we're selling the property, and we have 2 executors and executrix, and it's all brothers and sisters, but getting everybody together and whatnot is more of a challenge than having 1 person with that decision-making ability, I think.
Correct. Yeah.
And what has that change with the Zoom for this process? How has that impacted like the time? It seems, does that help with the speed of this process? Because before you have to do it differently. How did you do it before?
So it's so funny. I think this is one of the best things to come out of the pandemic, because previously what you have to do is you have to shower, get dressed, drive to the courthouse, find parking, get into the courthouse to sit there for 5 minutes. And then go back home. This way, you're in the comfort of your own home. We do this Zoom. You have to show your ID, you show the signature, you do the electronic one on the Zoom. It's way easier. And then they may, some of the counties require that, like the wet signature that you did on camera to be sent to them. But honestly, we're getting short certificates within like a week of doing the probate hearing. So I think it's really streamlined the process.
Is there any possibility in that whole process of like having like a fraudulent person or actor in this? Is that a concern, or doesn't, because they're protecting and getting the copies of everything? And
sure. So normally the person comes to me and they have an ID. So if they're in the will, then they match the will. Otherwise, a lot of people don't step up to be the administrator for nefarious reasons that I found, just because it's not a fun position.
Right.
And it's so I have not seen that, but I think with the IDs and the whole process, I think it's pretty secure.
Okay. And we're starting to see some Q&As come in. So thank you everyone on the call. I think I'm going to hold them because it's particular to a real estate transaction. But we will definitely, to everyone on the call, we're going to answer all your questions. So don't worry about that. Anything else on this topic? Or are we good too?
I think we're good with that one.
Okay, thanks. So the next part of it, obviously, it's something to think about. People don't want to think about this stuff, obviously, but it's something we should.
Yeah.
And we wanted to know from you, like, what tips or tricks do you recommend for those that are listening right now? What would you say to them that would be very helpful?
Sure. And I can really only speak to my process, but I think the statistic is that only 1/3 of people have estate planning documents, have a will. It's not
Wow.
something you want to talk about. It's not something you want to do. Every time we have a issue in our process, my legal secretary and I find a way to make the process easier. So we have a questionnaire where you fill out your family members and your assets. So we identify those. We then do some work on our end to distill out the beneficiary designated accounts. We send over a list of the people, the executor, the trustee, the things we'll be talking about at the meeting, so that you have this list beforehand and you're not surprised by my questions. And I usually it's the spouse first. I go through the appointments. So an executor is about a year. A power of attorney would be as long as you are alive and need someone to act on your behalf.
Okay.
The trustee is however long you put money in trust for. So and when we have our meeting, we talk about, they're like, who should we appoint? And I don't know the people in your lives, but I can tell you that, like, for an executor, for a trustee, this should be someone type A who is organized and is responsive.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's great.
Your healthcare things, maybe it's somebody who has a medical background in your life, or someone who intimately knows your wishes and how you would like to be cared for. So that one's a little bit more emotional, sensitive than the positions that need to get stuff done. So I would say, if you have a will, just take a look at it, make sure it's everything you want it to be. If it's from 20 years ago, you should probably redo it because the laws have changed. There are certain things that can be done to account for changes in the tax law. Right now, the federal inheritance tax level is 12 million plus per person. So most people don't have that implication right now, but if they lower it, you might want to make sure your documents account for that.
Would you elaborate? You said 1/3 of the is it 1/3 of the population has estate only, right? Only. And how would you define, is that including the will?
Yes. So yes, only 1/3 people have wills.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea that it was that low. I'm shocked by that.
I know, I am too.
Yeah, it's upsetting, and it's definitely something that this is my primary area of practice. I really enjoy it. I love being able to get through this process with people, and my goal is to have them at that signing meeting being like, wow, that was so much easier than I thought it was going to be. That's my job. My job is to take this burden off of you and to get this done so you can be like, wow, I can sleep tonight. These documents, we hold them in a secure vault. We give people electronic copies. But it's done. It's taken care of. And you have now given your family a roadmap of what you want if something happens to you.
I bet you find as well, people with the whole healthcare power of attorney. That's what I find really challenging with some people, like in my position where I'm like, you really need to have it. Like where I am at Beaumont, if somebody is transferred to the hospital, we actually have a whole packet that goes with them so their wishes are known.
Yes.
And I recently went through a situation where the daughter was just so emotional about it.
Yep.
And I had to really insist, like, listen, this is, your mom needs to say what she wants.
Yep.
But there I do find, and also it depends on your age.
Sure.
So like if you're young, you might want more measures taken, extreme measures taken, versus if you're 80 or 90 years old.
Sure. So Lydia, this is an interesting thing, and I don't know if you've heard about this. The doctors would prefer that us lawyers stop practicing medicine.
Oh, okay.
So I have moved away from those checkbox ones.
Oh, okay.
And what we do now is we appoint an agent that I then encourage you to talk to about what your wishes are, how much you'd want to be hooked up to machines, for what time period, what measures you want. Because the problem is with those check boxes, you may have a specific situation where you do need this, but you
Right,
said you didn't want this, and they can.
right, right.
So this way, you're
Huh.
appointing a person to work with the doctors
Mm-hmm,
and the people who are knowledgeable.
mm-hmm,
So that's the way we've gotten away from the checkboxes
mm-hmm. That makes
because
sense.
of that complexity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Wow,
So
that's
really then the
interesting.
thought, I'm sorry, the thought there is then you don't need to think about all these like kind of traumatizing questions. You
Exactly.
just need to think of someone who
Yeah.
knows your wishes
Yes,
and will do right by you.
yes, yeah.
Mhm.
And I
So I
will say
believe
personally, when my husband and I did ours years ago, that was part of it. We were much younger, and then, it really gave us pause to
Sure.
think about, okay, well, at this point, in
Mhm.
my life, I would
Yep.
want these things. So I agree with you, like the check boxes really throw people.
Yes.
Yeah. So
That's
you
one of
need
the
to know.
hardest things. And then picking a guardian for your children is
Oh
usually the
gosh,
thing.
yes.
It's
Yeah.
usually the thing that prevents people from getting a will.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
might be the most important reason
Yes. Yes.
because if something happens to you,
Mhm.
you're leaving it up to the heir who
Mhm.
gets your children. And I think most people move to this area for schools and so forth. And you want that, you did that for a reason. So pick someone who will have the same values as you.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Again, not fun things to think about, but so
No.
critically important.
Yes.
Oh, I'm still shocked by the 1/3 statistic. I'm sorry. I'm just like, I had no clue it was that low.
Yeah.
Well, it is shocking actually when you but this is all good information. It's just, yeah, it's tough. It's
Yeah.
tough.
So we did have some questions,
Sure.
Laura. The question came up was, if a house is in both names, husband and wife,
Mhm.
and one spouse dies, so I see this all the time, and the surviving spouse plans to live there for the foreseeable future, should the house be retitled?
Okay. My answer is yes. Because if you wait and then the second spouse dies, then you need to find the death certificate for the first spouse. And it's just with most things, the more time that passes, the more difficult it is to recreate things. So I would say yes. And that is not an expensive, complicated process.
Mhm.
To do that one
Correct.
slate, thing.
Yep. We do that all the time. I just did it this week.
Okay. And then I think the next portion, what we're going to talk about was, hang on, I just have to move is I wanted to give it, we still have some items to cover, but I wanted to let everyone know that they should definitely try to connect with us on social, because there's a lot of really interesting things. So for everyone on the call, you saw how these flower pots just came up, and it's something we do. We do a lot of things for our clients, our neighborhood friends, people that are on the webinars. We do all kinds of really interesting things. So for coming up for Mother's Day, we're going to be doing potted plants.
Oh,
So
nice.
if you like us, follow us, and share, you'll benefit. And those on the call, you'll get an invitation for that event. We just did this for Valentine's Day, where we had bouquets of roses for everyone.
Oh.
And it was an awesome, fun day. We really enjoy doing stuff like that. So feel free to reach out. And I wanted to, just so everyone has your contact information, Laura,
Sure.
what's the best way for people on the call to reach you? Is it through the website or call or email, or do you have a preference?
Sure. So my email is laura@reidenbachlaw.com. It's pretty straightforward. It's just my first name and then at reidenbachlaw.com. Anybody can contact me for my phone number. I have a direct cell line. My job can be important quickly, so I am usually reachable. My legal secretary and I work very closely to help people when they need it. We had a client who contacted me prior to his dad passing. It was imminent. I explained what we needed to make sure everything was in order. And then when he did pass, we were ready to probate the estate and get things moving. So I'm very responsive. I believe that is something that is very important today. So yeah, the website, me directly, either way.
So you're kind of like me, because what we deal with is, it's almost, in my world, it's almost like a 24/7
Yes.
situation where there's never kind of a stop and a start. Everything's
Yes.
kind of always in motion because
Correct.
people are always, asking questions, things come up, there's challenges, so it just doesn't seem to stop. It's actually, that's why you work a lot of hours in this world, this
That is
business.
true. Very
And
true.
I wanted to talk to you if we could, and before we open up to see if there's any other questions. Early on in the presentation, we were talking about the question which comes up a lot. I was wondering if you could give us some kind of a sense as to the navigation, what you would recommend after like the passing of a loved one, because I get that question like continually, and people just don't know where to turn or what their steps are in that process.
So I would say I'm happy to help. I would contact an attorney. And then what I will do is in the beginning, it's good to talk to an attorney and tell them this has happened, because then I can tell you the first couple things to do. First thing is just wait. Creditors will wait. They understand what has happened. Really, you need to, and we mentioned this earlier, get the death certificate, the will if there's a will, and then contact an attorney to prepare the probate petition. That's
Okay.
all you need to do. That, secure any assets, but don't worry about paying bills. It will wait. And then usually it's about a week to 2 weeks process to get those short certs when you now have the ability to act. And then again, as I said, some people like to use their banks. I have a bank that can work with an executor remotely, wherever they are, and get that done. That's amazing.
Wait,
And
did you just say remotely?
yes,
That's amazing.
Wow.
yeah, I have a very good relationship with a bank that we use that it's right down the street from us, so we can deposit checks, handle it. They give us statements whenever we need it. But I have an executor in Jersey, and so I said, yes, you could do the bank where you are, but a lot of times I like to control the bank account. Obviously, the executor is the only one that can sign the checks, but then I can make sure that everything is accounted for and all our deductions are taken so that we lower your tax. But this bank absolutely will. We prepare the paperwork and they send out for an electronic signature. They get your ID and they get it all set up.
That's great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So the process, it seems like the process has gotten a lot better. I mean, with the use of things like Zoom and that
Yes.
ability, that's got to save a lot of time for everybody, I would think.
Yes. And then the knowledge, I've been doing this for 20 years. So the knowledge of how to navigate it cuts down on time and so forth.
That's great. Amazing.
Any other questions? Lydia, anything that we didn't
You
cover?
want to answer the other question?
Is there another question?
I
There
think
is.
that was the question. Actually, I think I saw you only had, oh, I apologize. You're right. Oh, I'm not scrolling. My fault.
No worries.
Leave it up to Zoom. All right, so the next question. Sorry. I have 2 executrix on my will. My daughter who lives in Portland, Oregon, and my niece who live in Pennsylvania. Sounds as though from what you're saying, this could be a problem.
So I don't want to use the word problem because that's harsh. It just could make it more cumbersome.
Yeah.
Just because, again, the one in Portland is far away. Presumably, if something were to happen, she would come to Pennsylvania. So a lot could be done during that trip. And once we get everything like established, then remotely it is okay. I do have executors from all over. The only thing is that I would consider in that circumstance is to make sure that they get along.
Yeah. Right. Right.
I mean, there is a little bit of cumbersomeness but if Portland, Oregon were here, we could have her sign a bunch of checks. I could keep the checkbook and say, daughter, niece, may I pay a bill in the amount of this? And they would both email me back and say yes, and then I would send that out. So there are workarounds, but again, if they disagree, then we do have a problem.
So I guess what I was always wondering, but I was interested in your background early on in the presentation. We're talking about your background. I saw the psychology background. Is that a huge piece to this puzzle, that when you're dealing with the emotion and these family dynamics and all, does that come into play a lot?
I do, and it all depends on the people, whether we're dealing with, a surviving spouse or a child, and then the age of the person who passed. I mean,
Oh, sure.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of factors that are into each situation, and the process is the same, but each situation is different. So some people may need things explained more than others. Some people can't deal with it, and those are tricky, because you should not have been the person who was nominated here, which is interesting. I mean, but again, I have the knowledge to guide this through. Again, that's why I say pick someone responsive. As long as they're responsive, we can get this done, because I have the knowledge to help them, as long as they are willing and able to do the work.
Mhm.
And I like your idea of having the type A person
Mhm.
uh, be involved in the process. I think that made good sense.
Yeah.
Those of us who are type A appreciate that. And
Yes.
I was a psych major too, so I get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It helps.
Yeah. And I've been through so many situations. I can kind of relate to people and understand. My mom passed away when I was 30.
Mhm.
So
Ooh.
I administered her estate. So I know what it feels like.
Mhm.
I have had people appointed as power of attorney who can't handle it, and we have to renounce and pass it to someone else.
Mhm.
I've dealt with the disasters
Mhm.
of bad documents and having to navigate how we get things to the beneficiaries in the limited constructs of those documents. So I do, it's fascinating.
Mm.
It's a fascinating area.
I would
And what's
imagine.
so great about this venue is that what I like is that the public many times has no, prior experience with this process. So I think it's the educational value and the ability to help people through this who have never been through it. I had
Mm.
I went through it for both of my parents,
Mhm.
and it's a process, and it was a learning process when I went through it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it's an emotional toll going through some of these processes,
Oh, yeah.
and it's that proactive versus reactive. If you can do things in a proactive manner, and do it well in advance, it just makes everything so much easier for
Mhm.
everyone. It really does.
And
Mhm.
it's a money saver.
Yes.
Huh.
Drafting an estate plan is not inexpensive. However, cleaning up a mess after the fact is more expensive.
Mhm. Very true.
Yeah.
Good words.
Yeah. I think we have one more question, Brett.
Oh, sorry, I did, but I think it's a duplication.
It's
It was
not,
if
it's
one
slightly
spouse.
different. Yeah.
Was that the question? If one spouse passes and the
Yeah.
remaining spouse remains, okay. Can all the children be on the title? Okay, so there's a little bit of a twist
Mhm.
in this one. So the
Yeah.
question was, can all the children be on the title with the remaining spouse? And do you see that where you start adding people to the title and rather
I
than
do.
subtract?
I do, because if you put the name, say the mom and then 2 children, then when mom passes, only 1/3 of that property will have to pay tax. So it would be only 1/3 versus the entire amount
Mhm.
at 4.5. That's for children. The problem there is you now have just shared your asset with 2 other people. And I'm just using that example of 2
Yeah.
children. So heaven forbid one get knocked on the head and wants to sell it. Now it's not yours. It's the 3 of yours. Or heaven forbid they get involved with someone who is into drugs or manipulative.
Mhm.
So that's the problem. Yes, can you save some tax? Sure, but you have given up part of your asset.
Mhm.
And does the federal exclusion come into play here in terms of, you know, transferring the deed to somebody versus, you get the federal exclusion if it's a primary residence and you lived in it 2 of the past 5 years, you can exclude as a single tax filer 250,000 from federal tax, and a
Yep.
joint tax filer up to 500,000. How does that get into this whole mix?
Yeah, so I do recommend when we're doing things like this that we bring in your CPA to make sure that everything makes sense like that. So that is another consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a
For me, it's
very,
the control issue. Like, again, just making sure that the family dynamic is solid, because people want to avoid taxes, and that's fine. We can't evade them, but we can avoid them. And I understand how that's paramount, but you also have to understand kind of the psychology even of your decisions have other implications.
And Laura, do typically these meetings occur in person, or are you doing more like on Zoom now? What's the trend, and how does that all come into play?
That's a good question. So our first step is to send the questionnaire. We get the questionnaire back from the client, and then we distill out the non-probate assets, and then we schedule an initial meeting. And I have been doing those two ways, either just a telephone call, or we can do a Zoom if people are more comfortable that way. Sometimes it's just one spouse, but I like to do the telephone calls because we do a conference line and you can take it from anywhere. So we can get together and then you can go about your day. Then we have a review meeting after I sent you the documents to answer any questions, make any changes. If you read something and we're like, oh, that makes me uncomfortable, let's switch this person around. That's the point where we do that. And then finally, we get together for the signing where we notarize and witness the documents. We change any non-probate assets. We actually log into your computer, fill out any forms for you, and then we make you the electronic copy of the documents, and we keep the originals in our secure vault.
And what would you say is there like a typical start to finish time frame for that process?
Yeah, that's again, great questions. So that depends on you. That depends on the client. Usually I am able from start to finish under 2 weeks.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's great.
A lot of people call me, we're going to Disney World next Friday. I need it done in 3 days. We can do that. We can do that. These are important documents. These are difficult decisions. Anything I can do to make this process easier on you is my goal.
That's great.
And Lydia, is there any other questions you have before I want to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Okay, I think I got all the questions.
I think so.
Any other?
I would just say, I think people need to understand too, when you are the executor, there's a responsibility with that. And so that is a serious role. And if, somebody is not comfortable in that role, that really needs to be considered. So this is a very thoughtful process.
Yes.
When you're making these decisions. And so it's really great to have the legal advice and the guidance to help you through. And again, as Laura's saying, so much of this happens during such emotional times. You really do need that.
And to piggyback on that, Lydia, that is why when I appoint an executor in a document, I make sure there is usually 2 backups. Because yes, your first choice might be the best one, but then you never know at that time if maybe something's going on in their life that won't make them the best choice. So then they can say, I can't do it right now, and then it would pass to the second person.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Good advice. Yeah. Great information. Thank you so much.
Sure.
This
absolutely.
was awesome. I really, Laura, I'm very grateful for having you as my guest, and my co-host Lydia, of course. I'm very gratified as well. I want everyone to know that we do record all these, so those that were not able to, we had a lot of people on the call, but a lot more signed up and couldn't attend. But we told everyone that they didn't think they could attend, we'll automatically send a recording to everyone. It does take a little time for the recording to upload and to get them out. We also will email a survey. We're so grateful if people could give us any input as to how the series is going and help and input with future topics. So we do this typically monthly, and we actually have a couple more already planned out. We're working on one guest right now. We want to do one for security for our senior population, and we're working on that guest right now. So it's about, being careful with your email and your financial documents, and how do you protect yourself, and about all the stuff with Facebook, and what to do and what to click on and stuff like that. So that's something that will be coming up, which probably has very wide appeal for people. But definitely we'd be grateful if you could return the survey because it does help us guide us for future events. And I think that's everything for today. I don't, did I miss anything, Laura? Any closing comments that you might have, or?
Nope, just happy to help anyone who needs to navigate through this process, either in the planning stages or after the loss of somebody that you loved.
Lydia, anything to add, or you're
No,
finished?
just all great information, and Brett, it's great that you're doing this whole series, because I think
Thanks.
all the information that we provided over many months is really valuable. It's great that you're recording it too.
Well, everyone have a great Saturday. Stay
You too.
dry. Hopefully it won't
Yep.
be a monsoon today. When we got on early, we were talking about whether it's going to continue today or not,
Yeah.
but it's a little dark out there. So hopefully we'll have less rain and we'll all be good, but stay well, everyone. And
Yeah,
thanks
have a
for
good
joining
weekend.
today.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.